Lovely to be here. Thanks, Jenny. So last year, on the 13th of June, Friday the 13th of June, I had my first babies, twins, one of each flavour, and I have to admit, we were totally bricking it about having two babies at the same time. And I was an animal person, and I was rather than a baby person, and a career person rather than a stay-at-home person. And I thought that this whole experience would be extremely disconnecting, and that I'd feel kind of isolated. And I thought, I'm going to want to go back to work really soon. And what our experience was very different to that, and I'm hugely grateful for it, because, of course, you know, babies arrive, and actually, despite the difficulties, it's this kind of love tsunami, and you feel like no one could ever have felt like this before, and then you realize that, of course, it's actually the most universal feeling, and that it's an extremely connecting experience with family, with community. So I didn't want to go straight back to work 3 months later, or 6 months later, or actually a year later. But I have done relatively recently, after about a year, and I think just when I was reflecting and talking to Jenny, one of the reasons that I could come back was that I really believe in what I'm doing, and I feel very lucky to have the option to come back to something that is trying in its own small way to change the world. And I had an email from a friend when I was kind of considering coming back, and she said, I think we all have to remind ourselves as women who are in this transition that we're trying to raise independent, creative humans, and how can I tell my children to live their dreams if I'm not living mine? And I got that email, actually, Jenny, the same week that I got an email from Jenny talking about meaning and inviting me to come and speak. So I said yes, and here I am. So I'm going to tell you a bit about kind of living my dream, and I thought, given that I've learned about how unexpected amazingness can come when you least expect it, I'm going to put that lens of the unexpected onto the project that I'm going to talk to you about. And my timer here isn't going, so I'm assuming that somebody will kind of flag me. There we go. So now I've got 22 minutes. I'll start at the beginning. We make stuff, physical stuff, and I love working in a company that makes things, because I think with physical product can come kind of connection to story. We make beautiful planks and squares that architects and designers use to create environments. So, you know, the thing that attracted me to Interface was that we're doing that, and we're also on a bigger mission to change the world and change how industrial systems work. And Ray led that from back in '94, as Jenny said. So we've been thinking about the footprint of product for a long time. You know, if you make stuff, as long as that stuff doesn't consume energy when it's used, then probably where you need to focus is on the impact of your raw materials. And we've done a lot of interesting work there. But I kind of started thinking, and it was actually back in 2007, talking with the World Business Council for Sustainable Development about whether companies being expected to do more than just minimizing the footprint and minimizing the bad stuff. You know, what will the company role in the future be in addressing the fact that half the world's population is living in poverty? You know, it used to be thought crazy that a business would be interested in addressing environmental issues, and I think more and more now the business role in alleviating poverty needs to be something that big companies are held to account on and thinking about. So this was back a few years ago, where I first asked the kind of question internally was, you know, well, how about it? You know, Ray was all about if not you, who, you know, if not now, when. So we said, right, well, how could we make a carpet tile that alleviates poverty? And it sounds entirely crazy, like a lot of the interesting questions. And in 2011, the opportunity arose to actually do something about that in a way that looked like it could work. I'd done some investigation and some work with a brilliant woman in India, and we'd worked in natural fibers and done a partnership with a social enterprise, but it kind of hadn't stuck. So in 2011, I had a corridor conversation with our sustainability director, and he said, Miriam, you know that thing, that fairly traded poverty thing you were thinking about that kind of didn't work in India? I was like, yeah, thanks. He said, well, you know, our biggest supplier now has finally moved to recycled yarn, which will have a big impact on our raw material bar in that chart I just showed you. He said, and weirdly, we just found out, you know, they're using loads of old nylon from all over the world and kind of turning it back into recycled yarn. They're using our carpet. And they're also using fishing nets, and they're kind of buying them from Scotland and Norway and industrial fisheries. He said, couldn't you think about kind of fairly traded fishing nets? You know, and then he kind of swanned off again. And I thought, oh, okay, interesting. Could this be a way of asking that question that we first asked a few years before? So I'd like to just show you a little video, which was kind of 3 years after that conversation, how far we've got, and then share with you some of my reflections on what's kind of behind the shiny video and what was unexpected about that experience. So, thank you.
The livelihoods of the people in this part of the Philippines is completely dependent upon the sea, one way or another. Dinahan Bank is now one of the most degraded coral reefs in the world with some of the highest fishing pressure. Fishers use, especially in the Philippines, use a lot of monofilament nylon nets. When discarded nets get into the marine environment and they just hang around, they can last for 600 plus years.
This is a really high performance engineering plastic. You know, nylon 6 is in our carpet. It's also in lots of other products that people will use every day. So we want to make sure that material can be used again. Networks is a program that takes discarded fishing nets from impoverished communities and recycles them into carpet tile.
The idea is to collect discarded fishing nets off the beaches or get them from fishers as soon as they have finished using them.
What's really important about this program is that it's not a one-shot beach cleanup for some nice pictures. It's actually about how do you institutionalize nets and ultimately other material recycling in communities in a way that benefits them in the long term.
Hilaw man ako nga someday moabot ra gid ang panahon nga mahurot ang tanang pukot diri sa kawayonan. Kay daghan naman nga mosundog namo.
Mga sample nga gihatag nga gipatan-aw namo dire. Ako nakita nga dako diri kay mahimo ang maong pukot.
The product is still our product, beautiful carpet tile. It will look the same, but there'll be this story behind the material. This to me is the start of us being a restorative enterprise. We're giving back and giving opportunities that are way beyond what maybe people would think a carpet tile company could do. And this is only the beginning.
So that's what happened a few years later after lots of partnership and hard work and interesting conversations. So I'm just thought I'd kind of pull out 4 things with that lens of what you know, unexpected goodness. We talk a lot about unintended consequences being negative, but I think sometimes they can be good. And I thought Joss talked about that as well. Things happen when there's trust and space for them to happen. So the first thing was, I think, how unexpected and unlikely this marriage was. You know, when you ask an interesting question, you know, we think about co-innovation as bringing ideas and people and resources together around interesting questions and problems and finding solutions together because we're better together. And we never would have expected that a carpet tile would end up working with ZSL, the Zoological Society of London, who are a global conservation organisation. And I don't think our yarn supplier, Aquafil, based in Slovenia, ever thought that they'd be partnering in this way. So this kind of unlikelihood of the marriage was interesting. And yes, each organisation is having its own needs met. You know, we were interested in looking at the social aspect of the supply chain. ZSL are looking at ways of making conservation make sense in poor communities and creating alternative livelihoods to fishing. And Aquafil were interested in getting really high quality recycled nylon that they could put into their supply chain. But the sum of that, the shared objective is about a much higher purpose and really about demonstrating that there are better ways to do business and to rethink what the ripple effect of a small prototype can be. So this is our happy family picture. I get the feeling there's going to be lots of happy team pictures today, which is brilliant. So we've got the guys who are doing the hard work and the community organising in the Philippines, Mads and Mia and the team up there. And then down here we've got the combination of, PhD conservationists, business people, communicators across the ZSL and Interface teams. And, yes, it is structured, and yes, it's a formal partnership, but it's not your kind of traditional sponsorship thing. And that was, interestingly, me and my kind of entrepreneur counterpart, Nick, who's in the green jumper there, who you saw on the video, he's at ZSL. And we kind of shared that challenge in how you communicate internally within a big organisation, that this actually feels a bit different. This is an unlikely marriage, and it's got elements that are so much more than just, a big business paying a charity to do, frankly, what they probably would have been doing anyway. This was really about co-creating together. And I stole these three from I think it was David Willicott, who's a child psychoanalyst, and I've been obviously that child things and baby things are on my mind at the moment, and these three are kind of foundational elements for development. And I was thinking about them and thinking that feels true to what we're building and working on with this unlikely marriage. It's really about the trust and the freedom and the love of what we're doing and having space to kind of play within that. And I think when you've got those things and you've got that shared higher purpose, it feels like a real collaboration. And I think I love this quote about what a real collaboration actually is, when you honestly feel like the credit cannot be traced to one person. And I think this program feels legitimately ours in the biggest possible sense. So that's my first kind of unexpected bit, the unlikeliness of this marriage and the collaboration. And I think this quote then brings me to the second thing I wanted to touch on, which was an unexpected positive, was the power of this story internally inside the organisation. I've worked during my 9 years at Interface on adjacent and transformational innovation and kind of been on the edge of the company, not within the core. So when we were first developing this program, we were thinking about the impact and thinking about the impact in the world. And I've just been absolutely blown away by, for our thousands of employees, how excited they are about what we're doing and how keen they are to contribute. I first talked about the program in Atlanta at one of our sales conference with a few hundred sales guys, and I was at the global sales meeting the next day talking about other innovation stuff. And the guy stood up who was running the meeting, and he just said, Miriam, I just want to say I don't think there's any of us who were in that plenary yesterday who didn't go home and tell their families and their kids about this. And I just thought, wow. And I was kind of just envisaging this ripple effect and the power of people telling that story and talking about the potential. And it hasn't just been sales guys, and it hasn't just been telling the story. It's actually this has been something that people want to help with. We've had a whole bunch of ridiculous technical challenges, and this is one. Okay, how do you compress very highly voluminous light material to a density that makes it financially viable to ship it, so you're not shipping a bunch of air? Because this is a business, this isn't a charity. We need to make sure that the material gets there in a state that gets the highest price, so the most money can go back to the communities. And we have to do this without electricity. So, I've got some technical people who I work with. We were thinking about it, didn't quite get there, but we threw out the challenge to our engineers. And actually, the guy who runs our factory in Holland came back. We got loads of responses and said, well, how about the grape press and this kind of twisting mechanism? And that's what we ended up doing. So people internally, unexpectedly, have just gathered around it and put their love and energy into it, which has been amazing. And it hasn't just been people inside the business, it's been customers as well. And again, without asking, people have just taken and made this, as that quote said, made it their own. So Gensler, which is one of the world's leading design practices, this is their office in Los Angeles, and they contacted us and said, we really want to tell our employees about this, and for them to tell their customers, and they're serving lots of the world's biggest companies. So they're kind of raising awareness about it as well. And this is another company, one of our companies, a pharma company, again, did their own thing. And I kind of love that, and I was really kind of surprised and humbled by people, by something that seemed like a little idea and an experiment being taken on and made people's own. So that's been pretty amazing, the power of the story. And then the next couple of things I wanted to touch on were things that we never thought we would become when we first asked that question. A lot of what we thought we'd be focusing on was the kind of environmental impact of fishing nets. And yes, that's awful. This is one of the areas we work in. And yes, fishing nets persist for 600 years. And there's a zeitgeist whole thing going on at the moment about marine plastic, and that's very important. I'm not saying it's not. But one of the things that's really surprised me is that really more than that, although it still doesn't come across quite in how we communicate it, it's about community-based structures. That's where the real value is. And we've become a community banking institution. We've become a financial services model in very poor rural communities. And that happened by, again, dealing with one of the challenges. So how do you bring nets together in a cost-effective way? How do you aggregate people together and reduce those transaction costs? And we looked with colleagues at ZSL at how we might do that, what works in these kind of areas. We didn't want to reinvent the wheel, and we found that there's a model that was developed at CARE International, actually, called community banking, which is very structured and brings people together, enables savings and loans and a kind of community social infrastructure. And that became the kind of vehicle for building this community-based supply chain. So without intending to, the program's kind of becoming about financial inclusion. And actually, rather naively, I thought it would be about money for people. I thought it would be the extra money that people got that they would value and find important. And I'm not saying that hasn't played a role, but our monitoring and evaluation work that ZSL are leading so far indicates that the real perceived value for the communities we're working in is that they've this sense of empowerment that comes from being able to make their own decisions, essentially, because through these savings groups, they have access to savings and access to loans, and yes, a bit more extra money. So I think that was also unexpected, and I never would have predicted in 2007, right, so what we're actually doing is moving into more kind of the Triodos territory and banking and providing financial opportunity in areas where, obviously there's no cash point. So that was that was the third one. And there's a nice anecdote about this community. When I was over with Nick, we were on the boat coming in with Mia to one of the community bank meetings, and he looked onto the shore at some of the guys who were kind of waiting to help us in, and he turned to Mia and said, oh, look at their T-shirts. When did you guys, I didn't know that we'd paid to have those T-shirts printed. It was kind of community bank logo T-shirts. And Mia said, no, we haven't. That's just, I haven't seen that before. That must be something that the group has just done by itself. And that sounded, I didn't quite get the enormity of that from their perspective, but as conservation organizations working in very poor areas, they said, the standard would be that we would be asked to provide things like that. And this was actually indicative of kind of a deeper thing that was going on, which was all about people being able to make their own decisions. And again, feel extremely humbled. And, it's amazing that this program, again, in an unexpected way, is able to make some of these things happen. So that was the third unexpected bit. We've become a banking institution, but we're a carpet company. So the fourth one was, again, extremely unexpectedly, through this amazing partnership with ZSL, we've started to address what's one of the the biggest problems for the conservation movement. And that is, how do you make conservation, which is very often about stopping doing stuff and losing income, how do you make conservation pro-poor? You know, solving many conservation issues in these kind of coastal areas involves communities taking a big hit. You know, think about a no-take zone. And I'm no expert on this, so I'm very much paraphrasing. But, you know, if you think about a no-take zone, you know, you can't fish from here, you can't earn the money from this. You need to do this for a future benefit. And very often that benefit won't accrue until, you know, the end of a traditional funding cycle. So with networks, we're actually managing to provide a way to overcome the opportunity cost, yes, of, you know, picking up the nets and sorting them, but also a way of solving this bigger problem, because this is providing conservation organisations with a way to go into communities where there are programmes that they're working on with something hopeful and supportive and enabling, and that again, unexpected, and has kind of inadvertently answered the question that I get asked a lot at Interface that we're still pondering, which is, you know, how quickly could we grow this? How big could it be? And this kind of catalyst, if you like, for other conservation organisations to start spreading their work and move in could very much be the vehicle for how we expand. So that's what we're looking at now, is could this be something that's taken on and replicated by lots of conservation organisations as part of their bigger programme. So we're becoming a small part of a bigger movement. And again, that was very unexpected. So yeah, this is where we are today. You know, we're still starting. We've been going a couple of years. We have over 350 community banking members who are basically part of our supply chain and selling nets in. There's the impact of that on their household. They're able to have savings and loans as well as the extra income, as we talked about. And the indirect impact, of course, is bigger than that, because it's all of the community, and they've got fewer ghost nets, and they've got a cleaner environment. And we're hoping to grow this and expand, and through whatever kind of partnerships we can find, take this to any coastal area where it could be helpful and useful. And I say every time I talk, you know, I want this to be something that every company who uses materials could think about. You know, could we develop a whole kind of fairly traded material line that goes into, you know, not just carpets, but computers, cars, whatever else. And so that when we're touching those materials, we're thinking about the story and the lives behind it. So I hope this has given you a bit of a cause for ocean optimism and thinking about how the unexpected, you know, the unlikelihood of this marriage ever happening, but how full of kind of trust and love it is, the power of this story internally, and how people have started telling it because it feels like ours in the biggest sense, and also how we've become things we never would have expected. We've become about financial services, and we've become about, you know, solving an intractable problem in the conservation world. So, yeah, this is what I think, that, you know, we've tried to, you know, dream big about what we want to do, and ask the question, in our case, the seemingly ridiculous question of, could a carpet tile alleviate poverty? And then we just started somewhere. You know, we just had to get started and see what happened, and then embrace all these other unexpected elements and see where they took us. And, you know, if we can do that as a humble, mere carpet tile company, then it's really exciting to think what, you know, all the organisations in this room and all of you could do. So it's really nice to share the story and to be back from Baby Zone on the stage. Thanks.